is a precious and necessary resource. 71% of the Earth's surface is water, but only 3% is fresh water. I talked with Erin Bonney Casey, Executive Director of the Ipswich River Watershed Association, and John Macone, Policy and Education Director of the Merrimac River Watershed Council, about the importance these two rivers have on our community. I'm here with Erin Bonney Casey at the Ipswich River. Welcome.
Hi, it's nice to see you.
So can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do for the Ipswich Watershed?
I'm the Executive Director of the Ipswich River Watershed Association, and our mission here is to protect and restore the Ipswich River and its watershed.
And the purpose or the need for a clean river is?
Rivers do so much for us. There are about 350,000 people that drink Ipswich River water. So that's the number one reason that we want to make sure that the water is clean, clean enough for our drinking supplies. There's also people that recreate in the river. And there are lots of wildlife, plants and animals that also depend on the river habitat and the watershed as a whole. And so river health and water quality really impacts all of those stakeholders.
I know we happen to be in Ipswich and the river's called Ipswich, but it services many more communities than just Ipswich, correct? Where does it kind of start?
So the Ipswich River starts as a small spring all the way up in Burlington, Massachusetts. It runs for about 40 miles. It empties out into Crane Beach, into the ocean near Crane Beach, I should say. And but the watershed, which is the area of land that all drains into the river, encompasses all or part of 21 communities.
Okay.
So east to west, it goes Burlington to Ipswich. North-south, it goes up into Boxford and down into Danvers and Beverly. So that's kind of the area that we're looking at when we talk about the Ipswich River.
And what are your main goals for the upcoming, say, next 5 years for the Ipswich River?
Yeah, so when we're talking about clean rivers, we're really fortunate that the Ipswich is quite a clean river. We don't have a lot of discharge into our river from factories or wastewater treatment plants, and we have a lot of our riverbanks are protected areas, which is great for water quality. When we get most concerned about water quality in the Ipswich River is in the summer and during low flows.
Okay.
Basically, if you have slow-moving hot water in a river, that's when you start to get potentially algae blooms, concentrated pollutants, and that's when we start to see concerns about water quality. So for us, making sure that the water is clean is extremely tied to making sure there is enough water in the river as well.
Well, how do you make sure there's enough water?
Good question. A lot of it depends on the rain, how much rain we get, which is a little bit out of our control. But there's a lot of impacts that we as humans have on the amount of water in the river as well. So as I mentioned, there's 350,000 people that drink Ipswich River water. I should probably say they use Ipswich River water because we know you're not just drinking it, right? We're using it for all the things we use water for. And in the summer, a lot of that water is going to lawn watering. And so the water that we're putting on our lawns and gardens is water that's coming out of the river in large part in the summertime. Okay. So as much as we can reduce that water use, we get to leave water in the river, which is great for water quality as well.
Okay. What can people do to make sure, if they own property right up to the river, what can they do to buffer it or help keep the river clean?
So when water quality is really impacted by what is going on the banks of the river.
Okay.
And so when you get developments and you get devegetation, right? So you're cutting down trees and vegetation for developments. Our concern is always, what does that do for stormwater runoff and what's running into the river, off of the land and into the river? So we are very mindful of the developments happening in our watershed and their potential to impact the river through that stormwater.
Okay.
And which pollutants they potentially are picking up, and how do we mitigate that?
How would you mitigate something like that?
Yeah, so there are regulations that are in place to protect riverbanks to make sure we're not developing too close to the banks of the river, so that there is a buffer zone that provides for some protection of the water quality. We are very mindful that those regulations are being followed and enforced, and we try and make sure that conservation commissions around the watershed that are responsible for those regulations are informed about the best way of being protective of it. There are other things that you can do that go above and beyond the regulatory requirements in terms of managing stormwater through green infrastructure and letting it soak into the ground where it falls rather than running straight into the river.
Yeah,
and
almost like a natural filter.
Exactly. Water that runs into groundwater tends to be very clean.
Okay.
And our river is primarily groundwater fed, so any water that's coming into the river through groundwater tends to be very clean. Contamination comes primarily from surface water runoff, and so that's what we're focused on mitigating when we're talking about water quality.
So how much is climate change a factor?
Climate change in our region, we're seeing the biggest effects of climate change is the change in weather patterns, particularly the intensity of our storms. And when we get very intense rainfall events, we tend to get more stormwater runoff. And that's where we see those pollution events happening, that water is running straight across the ground and into the rivers and tributaries.
Do new developments around the river, what kind of effect does that have on the river?
The best buffer to protect the river is natural vegetation and native plants. And so we always encourage riverfront properties to think about what does that buffer zone look like and what kind of plants can you put there that are native to this environment and will serve as a natural filter for anything that's running off of your property.
Yeah, this area hasn't been hit by a hurricane since Bob in 1991, I believe. What happens when a hurricane does hit this area? How much is that of an impact?
That's kind of an extreme example, right, of an intense rainfall event. And so especially, when we get swings too between, we'll have long dry stretches and then intense rainfall events, and that's kind of the perfect storm for getting contaminated runoff, because any pollutants on the in the environment will sit during a drought period and then they all get flushed in at once during a rainfall event. Those are the types of extreme weather patterns that we're going to be dealing with increasing frequency going forward. And so we need to be thinking about how are we protective of the river in those extremes.
And that's with the natural buffers, it is really key.
Yeah, and trying to keep pollutants off the ground. So what is that rain picking up as it moves across the ground? It could be pesticides, it could be herbicides, fertilizer, industrial waste, at road sites, it could be road salts, it could be, fluids from cars. And so that's a key factor of clean and healthy rivers too, is making sure that we're not leaving pollutants in the environment to end up in the river.
Okay.
So, clean and healthy rivers are important in themselves for all the reasons that we talked about, but they're also a barometer for the environment as a whole, because anything that's going on in our environment is eventually going to run downhill and end up in our river. And that's why when we talk about river health, we look at the watershed as a whole, because anything that's happening within our watershed is ultimately going to show up in the river and is going to impact the health of the river.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, well, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Next up, I speak with John Macone about the Merrimack River. I'm here with John Macone. We're here to talk about the Merrimack River. First of all, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, John?
Sure, yeah. I've worked for the Merrimack River Watershed Council for about 6 years now. I'm a boater on the Merrimack. I do a lot of fishing, and I've lived in this area for quite a long time. And I love this river and I love this area. So I wanted to be involved in something that's trying to make a difference.
What is the importance of the Merrimack watershed?
So it's a vast river. It's the fourth largest in New England. It stretches all the way up into the White Mountains and down to Hopkinton, Mass. This is the whole watershed of this area. So when you look at what's flowing by you here, there's about 5,000 square miles of land that's draining into this spot we are in right now. So we're really concerned about seeing this river stay clean and stay healthy and improve it for future generations. And we're seeing that the use of this river is changing dramatically in recent years. So it used to be a filthy river. It's an industrial river. We have cities that, early American industrial cities that were built along it. They used to dump everything into the river. So 50 years ago, you couldn't swim. You wouldn't want to eat fish out of here. This was bad. Today, you look out and there are boats that are going down the river, lots of people swimming here and fishing, so it's cleaned up a lot. Another major change is there are so many people drinking it out of it.
Right.
700,000 people get their drinking water out of this river. It's one of the largest sources of surface drinking water in New England.
What about climate change? Does that affect the river at all?
Absolutely, yeah. So when you talk about the river, you can also include, we're looking out here at Plum Island and Salisbury Beach. Those are the barrier beaches that protect the mouth of the river. And, we're seeing that climate change is changing them dramatically. Just this past winter, there was overwash going over Salisbury Beach and wiping out the dune. And that's going to fundamentally change what's directly behind it, which is the salt marsh. So that's a big concern in this area. We're also seeing climate change issues upriver with a higher level of water, so there's flooding that's happening in certain homeowner areas, and neighborhoods that are established. And also with CSOs, this is a combined sewer overflows. So some of these old cities release sewage. Yeah, it's not
That's
pretty,
kind of gross.
but it happens, these are old cities. They were plumbed, in the 19th century. And they still have all these issues that go back to then. So just last night we had a CSO. You had a rainstorm. You can almost count on it. You're going to get sewage in the river. And so the climate change, we're seeing that there's larger rainstorms, more intense, almost like tropical downpours. And so that triggers CSOs very quickly.
What can we do about preventing CSOs? Is there something in place that we're trying to change or improve to stop it?
Progress is being made. Problem is it's very expensive. So, for example, Lowell is in the middle of trying to reduce its CSOs. And the first stage of its project is going to cost $200 million. And it's just going to go up from there as they produce along. Manchester's in the same boat. They're spending about $300 million. So, these are not huge cities, and this is a huge burden on people who live there.
There's no federal funding for that kind of stuff, or
They're
is there?
starting to get more. I think the more people are aware of it, then the more pressure is applied to try to get money to them.
Okay. And what about the fish and the quality of the fish? I know with Ipswich, with their river and the dam there, that they're thinking of removing so that the flow of the fish is upstream. Is that a case for Merrimack as well?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is a super popular place for fishing. For striped bass. We also have bluefish that come in here, and there's other species. But what they're all going after is the herring. So the herring are heading upriver. Right now we have hundreds of thousands that have gone up the river, and there are 5 dams along the main stem of the Merrimack. Each dam poses a problem for them. Right now there are an estimate of between 50 and 100,000 herring that are stopped at the dam in Florence because it's very difficult for them to pass. Passage needs to be improved there so that they can get through it and then get up to some of their spawning grounds.
What else should we know about the Merrimack?
This is one of the most popular recreational rivers in Massachusetts.
Even for up in New Hampshire. I've actually kayaked from the Pemmy into the Merrimack. So kayaking up more north, because I don't know how the river is obviously much smaller up there, but it's pretty wide. It's pretty nice recreational.
It's a big river.
How far up can you go with the motorboats and stuff like that?
If you've got a decent sized motorboat, you can go up to a little beyond Haverhill. So that's about 12 miles upriver from here. So another couple of things is right over here is Salisbury Beach State Reservation, one of the most popular state parks in Massachusetts. So a lot of people there because, they're on the river and they're on the ocean. What's going on in the river, the quality of water is going to influence what they're doing.
Besides these big projects, what can individuals do to help out the river?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are lots of little things you can do. If you live in the Merrimack watershed, you can get involved in volunteer opportunities. Like we do cleanups, and other organizations do too. Cleaning up trash, we're starting to discover all these issues that are interrelated to water quality, like microplastics and plastics in water. Another issue with a lot of rivers is there's too much nutrients going into them. A lot of that comes from our lawns, what we put on our lawns. You don't really need to be putting as much fertilizer on your lawn because a lot of it washes off and it goes into a river or a pond, and you're going to start feeding these algae blooms that are toxic. So that's something just to keep wired in people's heads. I can maybe have a different lawn, and I'm going to be helping the environment.
So what else is going on with the Merrimack River?
So we've got this interesting project we're doing right now where we're trying to unite the communities from Newburyport up through Lowell. We're trying to get all these communities together to work just like you do in the Ipswich River watershed, to look at it as a regional resource and to pinpoint where the problems are and to focus on them. So that's something new. We have a bill that's going through the legislature right now to create this entity so that we can do that. And we're also doing a lot more testing after these CSOs, and so that's something that the state has allowed us to start doing. It's the first time it's ever been done. So that's going to be interesting because this is such a vast river. It's so different in so many different places that we'd like to create a better alert system than we have right now to let people know whether they can or should not go in the river after a rainstorm happens.
Okay.
And dogs too.
Yeah.
a lot of people take their dogs in, and they don't know that there's sewage releases that happen, and dogs are particularly vulnerable to it because you know, think about it, they're in the water and they're swimming and they're drinking the water. We get reports of dogs that get very sick after going into the Merrimack after one of these sewage outflows happen.
So how, if people do want to get involved, a vast variety, whether it's recreation, whether it's helping out, or just getting involved in general, how can they do that?
Yeah, so you could go to our website, merrimack.org, and we have a lot of different opportunities. You know, we're always looking for people who want to do water sampling in the river. So that's something people can do if they've got some time. And we have all kinds of walks. You know, we want people to have fun on the river, and so we take people for hikes along the river. We have some programs in the summer where we take people out on boat rides, and we teach you about the Merrimack, and often we see all kinds of really interesting wildlife. You know, right here, if it was a low tide, we'd be able to see seals out here basking on the rocks. There are sturgeon in this river, which are an endangered species, and you'll see them. They leap out of the river really dramatically. We get all kinds of other interesting creatures that come in from the ocean.
Nice. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Thank you for joining us. Our next episode will be about solar energy. I hope you can join us.